Definitely, yeah.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Psychedelic State live stream with Jack, the founder of Psychedelic States of America. How are you doing today?
I am good. It is later on the East Coast than I'm used to as far as starting times, but glad to be here and excited to be able to announce this cool project we're working on.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a good one. So let's give folks a little bit of a background on what you have been up to. You're a kind of psychedelic journalist, kind of covering this as a beat, and doing some interesting work. So what
Yeah,
do you
no,
say you do?
I always joke with people that I would say that if there was such a beat as like the psychedelic politics beat, that's, if such a job exists, that's what I'd say I do. That
Mhm.
becomes, as you know, Joe, in this independent media space, very entrepreneurial. And so been doing a little bit of work kind of in the community building space, both with the New England Cannabis Convention NECAN series. We hosted a great 2-day track at NECAN Boston a few months ago. And I've also been working here in Boston at a pretty phenomenal venue right across the street from Fenway Park, big art gallery space at New Dia Cannabis Mall, to kind of build a forum for our community here after having gotten my start, as you know, and as we've talked about, on psychedelics, on these live streams before, got my start kind of both covering grassroots advocacy and that movement here in Massachusetts, while also stumbling into uncovering some pretty gross grassroots misconduct. And so through that process and through getting to know some of the really phenomenal advocates here in Massachusetts and across New England, I'd say, I've developed a strong sense of, obligation to tell their stories. And I've really been blown away by the effectiveness of some of their community building in the wake of the colossal failure that was the Question for campaign here in Massachusetts. So, in an effort to cut through the noise, but also in recognition that, with New Mexico's recent historic passage of the Medical Psilocybin Act and movement in other states to advance whether it's research bills or some medical programs, therapeutic access programs, really wanting to shine a spotlight on the people in your communities, in communities like mine, communities like yours, Joe, communities all across this country and around the world. That are really leading the charge and the discussion and actually taking the time out of their lives to go talk to their legislators on their own time and on their own dimes and organizing um, in a way that I think really will be remembered and really will go down as one of the most consequential political movements of the 21st century. That being the psychedelic renaissance. So long spiel, but all that has led to this exciting new project, which is the Psychedelic States of America Advocacy Spotlight Initiative. So
Mhm.
today, with just under 2 hours to go on the East Coast of the 26th of April, marks 2 months until the start of Psych Science on June 16th. My goal with this initiative is to interview at least one advocate or advocacy group from all 50 states, DC, Puerto Rico, and as many countries internationally as possible as well before the start of Psych Science on June 16th.
That's great. So, for those who aren't aware, psychedelic science is likely going to be the largest psychedelic conference ever to have happened in Denver. They did one 2 years ago, and it was gigantic and important. So, I hope to see some of you there. Yeah, and this is ambitious, and I like what you're up to. So you're going to interview that many folks, and there's just a lot of stories to tell, right? This is not
Uh,
a monoculture.
Yeah, no, it is really fascinating how nuanced this beat really is, and how many nooks and crannies in different communities. And I'm finding out about new grassroots organizations pretty much every day, as well as student organizations and some of my work with SSDP. Um, and so, really trying to jam this in. I know it's a relatively tight time frame for that amount of interviews. I'm fortunate enough to have developed some pretty strong relationships, and with activists in roughly 40 states and counting. So hoping to be able to tap into that network to coordinate scheduling a little bit quicker, but also really recognizing that this is a beat that can be fully legitimized if larger news outlets take it seriously. Drug policy beat in general, I really think deserves a closer look and greater consideration from legacy media outlets. And my hope is that by shining a spotlight on how deep rooted some of these grassroots advocacy groups really are within their communities, that we can make them undeniable and unavoidable. And
Mhm.
especially seeing how so many grassroots voices have been drowned out in other spaces or double crossed in certain spaces by groups that are run by people who don't even live in those communities. It's really important to me personally that we just do everything we can, both as media members and storytellers, but also as people who really care about this movement and know these leaders, to just make them unavoidably visible.
Mhm. I love that. So let's talk a little bit about like why this is important. So there's a number of folks who are doing really influential work, substantial work, and they have huge pools of money. But in a lot of cases, there's been kind of regular critique that the people who have been doing this work in those regions aren't necessarily included in the way um, that would feel good for folks. Can you speak to that concept a little bit and what your experience has been there?
Yeah, and I think the first thing I'll say is stay tuned. There is some critical reporting on kind of the blueprint of some of these operations and how they drown out some of these voices pretty effectively historically. That is coming soon, but I've seen it time and time again. I've seen it in states like Washington. I know you've done some great, had some great conversations with Reach. I've done some reporting on what they're up to. There have been reports in Oregon and Colorado of similar swooping in and writing a bill in a way that the community didn't really have the input that certain lawyers and lobbyist groups may have supported. But I also think it's as simple as like we talked about this the last time I was on with you, Joe. But the pair of activists here in Massachusetts that crossed over from the grassroots game and signed on with the Question For campaign really were the heart and soul of the education and community outreach. And that was actually their titles. But I know for a fact that there were reporters in the greater Boston area who had no idea that these two longtime award-winning grassroots advocates were even working for the campaign well after the election. Right now, today, the most prolific, single most successful, highest, largest amount of most amount of bills filed on the state level. That activist is a mom of four, single mother who lives in Marshfield, Massachusetts. She's filed more bills than any of these organizations can claim to, and has gained more momentum and built more relationships than many of these multimillionaire backed campaigns can even really claim. And I think it's a real shame that
Can you
that
say
not
who
enough
that
people
is?
know her name.
The activist.
Jamie Morey. Yeah, she's the
Great.
founder of Parents for Plant Medicine, one of the co-founders of Mass Healing. They're the organization that's small but mighty, against pretty much all political precedent and odds, was able to get 12 psychedelics related bills filed in the state of Massachusetts this January, which, for those who might not be aware, after a progressive policy issue fails as spectacularly and embarrassingly as Question For did, uh, bills don't get filed related to that progressive policy issue in the next session, not a month and a half later, not unless you have people who really know how to reach constituencies and really reach their
Mhm.
legislators. And I have been blown away at how authenticity plays a lot better than smoke and mirrors and corporate sham work, if you will.
Can you speak to what you're getting at there with like corporate sham work? Yeah, obviously,
I
kind of
just
hard.
think that the water, let me put it this way, the Massachusetts electorate was not against decriminalization of personal possession of certain psychedelics. The strategy that was employed by said campaign was egregiously incompetent, uh, based on a lot of different things that you will be reading more about soon. I have to be a little bit coy, but I do not believe that the results that we saw in Massachusetts are really how the Massachusetts electorate would feel about a similar measure had it been written competently and campaigned upon effectively.
Hmm. That's interesting. Okay, great. I was really optimistic for the thing to pass, but really it was pretty disappointing. It's the state I was born in. It was, I've lived there. I generally like the place quite a bit, but it was hard to see it fail. And I think a
Yeah,
lot of people feel similarly, right?
yeah, and I
So,
think just the good news is that at least on paper, we've had this really phenomenal resurgence moment in New Mexico, and we've had some really fascinating legislative developments across the country. I read tonight on LinkedIn just a couple of hours ago that next week, I think it's an Iowa Senate State Senate committee meets over a similar medical psilocybin therapeutic framework bill that's been proposed there. I think over 30 states and counting have filed 68 something pieces of psychedelic legislation this year. Those are rough numbers, but so the momentum is there. I think that the grassroots interest and the bipartisan interest in this issue defies pretty much every political rule that one can think of when it comes to a drug policy related issue. And I think that there's a progressive blueprint for broader political reform that exists within the grassroots paradigm in the psychedelic community.
That's interesting. And for you, what is it about psychedelics that makes it such an interesting topic generally?
I think for me, it's even beyond bipartisan interest. It's how generations from now, the way that psychedelic policy reform works out in the next 5 to 10 years will have tremendous effect and impact on healthcare equity outcomes. I, for one, couldn't afford to go on a $3,000 retreat anytime soon. Doesn't feel right to go out of the country to go on a retreat when it's illegal in this country. And I think that there are a lot of people in the next 10 to 15 years that are going to really want and probably have very good reason to access psychedelic assisted therapy after exhausting pretty much every healthcare avenue that they can to receive care and help. And I don't think that we're going to have adequate systems to make those treatments affordable or accessible. I think there's going to be a lot of talk about that, but I think it's going to be a lot of what we've seen with the Democratic Party over the last decade and a half, really over the last 30 years. A lot of big talk and a lot of and very little follow through. But the grassroots advocates in this community have the strength in numbers and the unprecedented bipartisan coalition building opportunity to really cut through the noise and to really hold some of these special interest groups accountable when they say something isn't possible and they don't even live in your community, so they don't even really know. I really think that there is an opportunity here, and that's why this advocacy spotlight initiative I think is such an unprecedented thing. I keep saying that, but yeah, it's been a long day. It's been a long day, Joe, but I'm glad that we're able to make this work and make this announcement happen tonight.
Absolutely. So, what is it for you that makes local organizations or organizers come off as like really interesting and potentially really helpful for moving this larger kind of psychedelic project forward?
Well, not only by the numbers, just the majority of Americans hold in terms of majority opinion a number of anti-establishment views at kind of the top 3 to 5 most agreed upon sentiments in America, that being distrust of the government, distrust of the mainstream media, and a discontent with the two-party system. Psychedelics is in kind of that 4 to 5 range by the numbers of things that people are interested in, at least in terms of increased access for therapeutic support and mental health alternatives. So because we aren't connecting with and we don't trust, by and large, many of the big media and larger than life figures that exist in our popular culture today, being able to reach people on a personal to personal, really person to person, story by story basis has a tremendous effect in that, that so much of the hemming and hawing on Capitol Hill just doesn't have. And I also think that it's important to note that, so many of us are only 1 or 2 degrees separated from the mental health crisis that, again, a majority of Americans are in agreement. We are in a mental health crisis on a global scale. And if we can't find community in tragedy, then I don't know where else we can find community these days.
And do you, it sounds like this, and correct me if I'm wrong. So you're of the opinion that psychedelics could radically reform psychiatric healthcare and further probably just change the way we relate to government. It sounds like there's a lot here for you beyond healthcare. Is that
yeah
accurate?
I'm hesitant to, and I have an immense amount of respect for Rick Doblin. I've been fortunate enough to get to know him over the past few months. I am hesitant to lean into utopian-esque language because I think that many of the issues that plague our society today are largely systemic and woven into many of the institutions of power that currently exist. But public sentiment and majority sentiment is so rapidly trending towards anti-establishment that a better way forward in a new paradigm is a real possibility should the cards line up. One thing that I would note as kind of a historical example, I'm personally not a fan of the current administration and did not vote for either iteration. But it is important to note that back in 2015, when Donald Trump was first rising to power within the increasingly at the time working class Republican electorate, there was talk within the Republican primary system of raising the amount of votes that was required to gain the nomination so that he wouldn't be able to get it. And he became so undeniable within that electorate that they could not change those rules. They couldn't pull the switcheroo. I am not a fan of what came next. Can't emphasize that enough personally. But I think that the phenomenon that, populist sentiment in favor of one ideology, one individual, one path forward, or even a collective, as we're seeing discontent with the current regime, as I would call it, growing in some of the blunders of their early days. So again, I think the inherently anti-establishment nature of support for psychedelics, coupled with a growing nonpartisan support for the issue, I think it even extends beyond partisanship. So I think that again really represents a unique opportunity for other progressive movements to take note and to consider the hyper-local to state level to national pipeline and how we can market some of these next-gen progressive political issues in a more nonpartisan universal ties way. I am not a political expert, nor am I a political strategist, so I'm not qualified to answer that question. I am simply here to document it. But I have seen that blueprint work in real time here in Massachusetts, and I hope that it can be replicated elsewhere.
Right on. Great. Well, thanks for that. And I appreciate caution when you're speaking about stuff like this. I personally have a very hard time couching myself as not being an expert on certain things. But glad that somebody does. So,
yeah.
Let's see.
I am just a scribe. I just get to report on what's going on. That's all. Can't emphasize that enough. And if I am wrong, if I am ever wrong, I will own it.
Yeah, right on.
You have my word.
So let's kind of talk about this idea of journalism in psychedelia. Like there's this there's plenty of people doing media, right? But like how would you personally like to characterize something like journalism here, like as different from just regular media? Because I'm actually sure, nearly certain, there's people that haven't actually been exposed in their lifetime to actual journalism at this point in America. It's scary, but I think I think there's a sense that I think that could be really true, and it would be good to lay that out for a moment here.
Yeah, I think personally, I think the work that I have done that's really resonated with folks that people seem to categorize as a good, good old fashioned honest journalism is above all else kind of like this initiative, people facing. One of the highest compliments that I've received by somebody I really respect in this space, about some of my work is that it feels incredibly accessible. Really not trying to talk in overly legislative speak or political jargon, and also not trying to quote the same 5 press releases from the same 5 political groups that weren't nearly as involved in the drafting process as they might purport themselves to be. So again, I really think that being one thing that I really pride myself on is any article I write, I want to quote a group that's in your community about what's going on. And I don't think that there's a lot of coverage that does enough of that. And I think the coverage that does is largely confined to this little psychedelic independent media ecosystem, which, by the way, some of the most phenomenal reporters of our time are currently covering psychedelics and cannabis and drug policy issues. And they're far more resilient and resourceful and efficient than many of the reporters who make staff salaries and free lunches and any number of benefits that comes with working for a corporate news organization. And it's not even an insult. It's not intended as one to those larger MSM reporters. We just know how to do more with less. And that's one thing I want to point out about this initiative is, Joe, is that like I have no funding. We're doing, you've been kind enough to offer to syndicate this project through the Psychedelic Today network. I've been approached by a couple of functional mushroom companies kind of in the space interested in attaching their brand with some sponsorship money. I'd probably prefer not to do ad reads, but I really want this to be a crowdfunded grassroots project, and I think that there is enough of a sentiment moving away from support for MSM outlets and a lot more seeking out of independent reporters and independent spaces that a coalition of drug policy focused or just drug culture focused independent media news outlets could really thrive. I say that as we're knocking on a global recession's door. So what do I know? Things could be very different 6 months from now. But I am hopeful because I see the interest from readership. I have people all across the country ask me to come to their community and tell their story. And we have readers clamoring for more and more. So if you're an alt media or alt mainstream legacy media outlet out there that's interested in really taking this beat seriously, I have an army of reporters ready to report for you. And it's a good business decision because none of your competitors are covering it the right way, and people will read it, people will consume it, I promise.
People are very hungry for it, and like I wish I had the resources to hire a whole squadron of journalists, and I just tragically don't. So yeah, if somebody's in mainstream media, like let's do it. And there's organizations like this one and other media organizations that will partner with you if you want to take on some projects to get your feet wet. So think about it. I think that's a really good call to action. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. That was done.
So like how, if we're going to give people a couple takeaways here. So you've got this project coming. It's going to cover a lot of local organizations. It's going to be really interesting. What kind of stuff should people know, perhaps like ahead of time, about like this larger psychedelic movement or anything that's adjacent before they like kind of come to this content?
Well, I think that the trend towards an American or even a Western Hemispheric culture that's more open-minded about alternative health and lifestyle choices is something that I think has really roped in more and more folks adjacent to drug policy and drug policy reform that are interested in plant medicine in general. I think it's like 51% of Americans have considered a vegan diet in the last year. I think that there are another organization I want to shout out, and an individual is Psychedelics for Climate Action, my good friend Marissa Feinberg, who has really been an inspiration to me to trying to figure out how to fine tune content and educational strategies and information surrounding psychedelics, different constituencies, different demographics. Because again, we're all so many, like only so many, 1 or 2 degrees separated from any number of international crises related to mental health, global health, rising autoimmune disorder issues, chronic health conditions. There are so many different alternate and natural health and wellness modalities that can address those that people are genuinely interested in, and psychedelics is one of those. And I think, again, we can just rope in so many people that might be interested in this but don't know it yet, or might find their way to advocating for this on behalf of a loved one. And yeah, so I am really hopeful that this can be an opportunity again to really shine a light on the folks that are in your communities really doing the work.
Great. And how can people follow you and Psychedelic States of America and all these assorted projects you're onto?
Yeah, so I am pretty easy to find, active on LinkedIn and Instagram, mostly trying to get over on the blue sky as I try to juggle all of the different social media platforms. I would love it if anybody tuning in would subscribe to the Psychedelic States of America Substack and YouTube. like the LinkedIn page, follow the Instagram. I am going to be rolling out, a number of different collaborative projects alongside this one as well. I'm going to be announcing the broader like schedule for interviews in the next 2 weeks. We're launching officially on Sunday with an exclusive interview with an incredible lineup of panelists, all from the New Mexico grassroots scene. I will be announcing that full lineup tomorrow, but that's going to be on Sunday, 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific. So tune in for that. And then we'll be back and kind of officially launching the broader tour, if you will, on the 26th in my hometown of Richmond, Virginia, teaming up with Decrim Nature, as well as representatives from the Dracone Kibi Church, and a number of other activists in the Virginia space. So yeah, there's a whole tour that's tentatively lined up that you'll be finding out more about soon. But very excited. And again, thanks, Joe, for having me on and letting me announce this exciting project in the first place.
Absolutely, Jack. Thank you for being here, and I really appreciate you and all the hard work you're doing. I know it's not easy to develop a new beat like this, but I know it is going to be impactful and meaningful. And there are people who've been at it for a while, like our friend Annie Oak from Lucid and others. So it's going to be really exciting
Yeah.
once, and Mary Carrion from Double Blind and other places, Rolling Stone. She's written for everybody. And it's just going to be really exciting to see what happens once we can mature the writing around this space so that we're getting actual facts and not just PR. And let's see what we can do, everybody. And yeah, let's follow along with Psychedelic States of America, support Jack, support other writers, and see where we can go. All right. Thanks, Jack.
All right. Thanks, y'all. Have a good night.